Again, my name is Brian Marks. I'm a senior solutions consultant here at Iterable. And today we'll be talking about, hey Barbara, we'll be talking about immaturity is out and marketing maturity is in. And really what that means is just what are sophisticated marketers doing to kind of take their campaigns to the next level. So I'm gonna jump to the next slide. Sweet, so this is what we'll be covering. You know, who we are, why should you listen to us, some teams we work with, what is marketing maturity, I think, and then a quick disclaimer there. And then also, how can we mature, you know, across our channels, our multivariant tests, our holdout groups, segmentation personas, and more stuff to think about, and then some key takeaways. So I'll jump on in. So this is me. I'm Brian Marks again for the 5th time. I have been in mobile for quite some time. I think it's an awesome place to be, super fun. I've been in mobile for about 6 years. I've been an iOS consultant. I've done freelance mobile development. I've launched a few apps to my app store, to the app store. I've worked at some other parts of the mobile stack too, so I kind of, you know, been around the block. I was at Mixpanel, which is a fun place where you can analyze product data, you know, the great product, you know, a lot of cool, great people there. And then also at Apps Flyer, similar to Branch's mobile attribution, where did the user come from, that sort of thing. And now I'm currently at Iterable, which has been super fun, and we're doing marketing automation. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we'll kind of tie it all together for the most part. I have implemented a ton of SDKs in my day. Spent a lot of time fiddling with code, for better, for worse. And then I have talked to a ton of companies across all, you know, all these different, you know, Mixpanel Apps Flyer, Iterable, had the opportunity to talk to a ton of great brands, consult with them, you know, help them get their stacks up and going and their marketing campaigns up and going. And I've had the opportunity to talk to over 35 Fortune 500 companies, and then some just really cool brands across the board. So really grateful for that. And then my fun fact is I did grow a beard for the first time during quarantine. That's been keeping me busy. But that is also me in the picture here. So moving right along. This is some proof. In 2017, I built an app in a weekend, and it did make $38.59. So I was close to retiring, but maybe not quite. But it was a fun experience. Maybe I should put a little more work in than just one weekend. I could have made some more money. But anyway, these are some teams we work with, some really fun, really exciting brands, folks doing some cutting edge stuff. DoorDash it's been super exciting to see. Zillow, Fender, Vice, all these folks from a ton of different verticals, and they all have, you know, a ton of different conversion points and a ton of different stacks. So it's been really cool to talk to a lot of these brands, and we've actually talked to a ton more of these brands. These are kind of the ones that gave us the okay to show the logo. So awesome to work with all these folks here. And then we'll kind of pull little pro tips from each of these, and then some other conversations I've had, you know, over the years with a lot of great brands. So what is marketing maturity at the end of the day? Like what does that even mean? So really it's about being sophisticated. It's just about a bunch of worldly experience, you know, what's knowledgeable, what's in vogue, what's kind of something people are experimenting that, you know, is typically, you know, kind of a little bit more innovative. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to when I'm talking about marketing, mobile marketing maturity. Some quick disclaimers. Mature does not necessarily mean successful. You can have a super simple campaign with your users, and it can be incredibly successful. So mature does not mean successful. It just means it's a little bit more, a few more moving pieces and maybe a larger scope. And really what we're going to talk about today is where marketing teams often start when we have a conversation versus where they hope to be. Or some brands are already there, but you know they're kind of lopsided, where they have one super sophisticated part of the stack, but then the other part's kind of just still in 2000, 2008 or 2009, whatever. So this is what we'll be talking about today. So starting off, channel maturity. So you know channels, we have email, push, typical ones for mobile. So let's talk about channel maturity. And this is what we typically see with folks coming in. You know, they have transactional, they have some behavioral profile data, but it's all pretty you know, siloed. You basically have a transactional every single time someone buys, there's an email shooting out. And folks might not know that an email shot out. Like the mobile team has no idea that an email went out. They're completely, you know, they don't even talk to each other. They're kind of on opposite sides of the building or of the Zoom calls nowadays. But yeah, that's one thing we'll see is really siloed, and they can't really leverage each other. They're also likely not including any product data. It's really manually added. They're not pumping anything back to a data lake for further analysis and kind of having a larger scope or like a source of truth. And they're not really including any third-party data. So it's kind of like, hey, this is what the app saw. This is all we have. They might throw some Facebook in there, some paid channels, because it's pretty easy to get those up, right? You just kind of throw Facebook some money. You can go and experiment there. But for the most part, it's just transactional going out, a few segmented pushes. But at the end of the day, the keyword is silos. So the point of sale system, online store, third-party data, transactional, they're not talking to each other at all. They're not leveraging each other. And that's really not the best user experience. Another thing that we see a lot is that folks can only like look a few weeks back. They can't, after like a month the data is dumped or something, or they just don't have the ability to do, a really long look back window or look at the customer. So that's something we see a lot. There's no channel preferences. It's like, hey, you signed up, you get emails. That's all you're gonna get. All campaigns are kind of just blasting at the same time. Doesn't matter if you're in Shanghai or you're in California, you're gonna get it at the same time. That's something we see. And then it's really trouble. They have trouble tracking all this information in one place. It's all over the place, and so it can be really tough for marketers to onboard that way. And that's a lot of the challenges we see early on. And then moving on to like a little bit more intermediate channel setup. You might have some profile data. Again, transactional might start to be talking with the profile data. It might be going to a profile, internal data lake or data store. But really, there's no product data that's added manually from maybe the BI team, and there's no really relevant third-party data that they can leverage. And they started to add a few more channels, right? They might have SMS, they might have set up their own Twilio instance or have their own maybe in-house things with in-app or push. But they're kind of maybe by different vendors, and they're kind of not like a holistic approach to the user. But they're starting to get going. They have channels, and things are starting to talk, and that's where it's starting to get interesting. But a few things we'll see, multiple vendors can be tough just because, the architecture can be different. They might not play too well together in every use case. So that's something that can be tricky. We're not engaging with the user's preferred channel again. Maybe we're like, can do one or the other, but maybe not like, if they prefer SMS, maybe you just can't talk to them on SMS as much. And then we're not leveraging all the data points, and we can only maybe look back a few months and not really LTV, which is what we recommend, like just to get a lifetime value of the user. A few more things. There's no prioritization around which messages are which sent by which channel. So that's something to think about as you have a ton of these channels start to onboard, like which channel should really get the priority over one or the other. So those are all things that the intermediate kind of folks are kind of talking about. But now we jump to like a sophisticated channel setup, and you have everything speaking together, everything's connected. So transactional, behavioral, product, third-party data, it's all going to a data lake. It's all combined on the user. So, you have a very robust user profile. You have all these channels, and you're doing a lot of channel optimization. So there's going to be a minority of users who only want to interact on a certain channel, only want to do SMS, only want to do email, only want to interact with push, and they're not going to want to, kind of deviate from that. So you really want to optimize which channel you're speaking to on the user. Another thing is the send time is hugely important. You can get a ton of lift if you have the right send time. We've seen tests where it's 10% lift, just sending the message at the right time, just so it's the top of the inbox, just so it's the first push they see. That type of thing is hugely important. And then lastly, kind of frequency optimization, which we'll jump into much more detail, but it's how many messages are sent and when not to send message. So all this is kind of coming together, and it's all being optimized and really interconnected across all of these channels. Direct email is another one to call out. Web push is also really interesting. And then universal webhooks is just a way to get a data out to maybe another third party or something. And quick plug, Iterable does do all this, and we really do try to help our customers get to this state where they're leveraging all these channels across the board and really interacting with the users at the right time, on the right channel, in the right amount. So that was channel sophistication. A few more things to note. Maybe seasonality is a huge important thing as far as when to engage with the user. And then also one thing that should be noted is all the content is really dynamic across these channels, meaning there's never like kind of a manual setup for the most part. It's all based on the user's behavioral engagement data or things they've done in the past or things they might do. So, and then one other thing to note is if you're really sophisticated, your point of sale, online store, third party, transactional, they're all leveraging each other. They're all really interconnected, and we'll talk more about that in a second, but that really makes the content for users that much personal and can really provide you that lift. So that's kind of our beginning to sophisticated walkthrough of all the different channel setups, and that's kind of, we see folks all across the board when we talk to them on what they're doing here. Cool. So now we're going to talk about holdout group maturity. So holdout groups are a very interesting approach to learning about your users, but what actually is a holdout group? It's just a form of cross-validation where you kind of hold one out and you test it. So you run an A/B test or a drip campaign, and there's a percentage of our users that do not receive the message at all, and you compare that cohort to the cohort of users who did receive the message. So one is just held out. And at the beginning stage of holdout groups, most folks don't have any. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're not always necessary, especially for smaller companies. You just want users to maybe use your product at first, or if you're launching a new feature, you just want people to use it. And so maybe holdout groups aren't necessary in the beginning stage. There's nothing wrong with that. But getting to a little bit more intermediate, you typically hold out around 2 to 10%, depending on what you're analyzing. And you can really start to analyze lift, right? So let's say, and a lot of these folks are, maybe doing 1 or 2 channels, or they're doing a blast campaign, and they can do that holdout group pretty easily. So, and one thing to think about is if you hold out 10% of your users and you send out a message to 90%, and the conversion rate's the same across both those, that marketing message may have not been the best use of time. It may have been a wasted message. If you had the same conversion rate with the people who saw the message who didn't, then that's something to think about. Was that message actually beneficial to the outcome that you wanted? So that's kind of the intermediate stage. Switching gears to sophisticated, what we've seen folks do. This is really common for gaming companies to kind of do this, but they'll do each campaign has holdout groups segmented by engagement. So what does that mean? It means you globally cohort your users by engagement, and you're always comparing apples to apples. So you have a very low engaged group and a low engaged holdout group, or you have a medium engaged and medium engaged holdout, or you have very high engaged, very active users, but you actually hold out a little bit. So you're always comparing apples to apples, or the same type of user to the same type of experience. So, and again, if we kind of grouped it all together and we just said, hey, here's our holdout group and here's not, you might have a message that's more effective for one type of user, and based on the demographic of the holdout group or the demographic of the campaign being sent out, you might get skewed data. So it's really important that you're comparing apples to apples as close as possible. It doesn't have to be engagement. It can be really anything, but you're comparing these two cohorts, like a cohort of a holdout group and a cohort that's actually getting the message. Engagement is just one way to do it. There's a way to do it within Iterable that's pretty easy to set up. So basically on the right-hand side, we have what's called our Workflow Studio tool, which is our lifecycle automation. And so every day it's just going to run through all the users and then cohort them by how much they bought over their lifetime. So if they bought $50 worth, 50 to 500 or 500 or more, we can start to label them. And then just kind of out of the box, we provide some cool holdout stuff. So you can see which group maybe performed better and then compare really those apples to apples again. One thing to think about though, kind of as a bonus, that I've seen rather large, 4-letter ride-sharing app companies do, is they'll actually, the question is, if a user doesn't receive a message at all, are you actually comparing apples to apples? So one user got a message, one user didn't. Is that the same? Arguably no, because you're interacting with that user and then the other one's not. So it's not quite a perfect, fair comparison. So again, these larger customers, people who might spend millions of dollars on their marketing campaigns, they might actually spend a couple more million, or like 10% of that, to actually just send out PSAs to their customers, or stuff that's not really relevant, but it's actually just kind of a control to say, hey, we got a message into both these persons' inboxes, we got a push to both these phones. At the end of the day, we made the experience as close as possible. Did this marketing message actually give that lift? So you might see this ad from, bang on the hood of your car, just a PSA right here, make sure you could save a cat's life if especially during the winter. So something to think about. But again, this is typically more of a paid ad, but you can do it for own media as well. So that was sophisticated kind of holdout groups. Switching gears a little bit more, we're going to talk about multivariant testing and how to be mature there, and what some more mature companies are really doing with their multivariate testing. So what is multivariate testing? It's just a technique for testing a hypothesis in which multiple variables are modified. And the goal is really to determine which combination of variations performs the best out of all possible combinations. So, you might send 10 different messages and we'll see which one's the best, or which one's going to convert the user to the next step. And beginning stage, again, no problem if you're not doing this. You may already kind of know your users really well, and you may have just a very simple promotion that you want to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. So a lot of folks are just not, they want to do it, but they're just not doing it kind of right now. But what does the intermediate look like? You might have kind of a single engagement, or again, kind of a blast campaign across any of your channels, and you're really experimenting with a ton of different stuff. For email, it could be subject line here. This is straight out of our dashboard. It comes out of the box with Iterable. It could be subject line. It could be the send time you're testing. It could be the email content. And folks sometimes just do it really simple. Maybe they just test like how many emojis they have. Maybe it's just exclamation or not. There's just like those little things. It might give 5 to 10% lift. And it's important to know that, and especially start to analyze your users across the different cohorts on what is effective kind of engagement. So a lot of folks will come in. They're kind of doing this across a few different blasts, but it's not super sophisticated. They know when they kind of just spraying and praying a little bit, but you will see some results. So let's talk about sophisticated multivariant testing. The more sophisticated customers that we see, they're actually doing hundreds of tests at any given point. So this is a user's life cycle. And you'll see the app entries, typical sign up and explore, pre-purchase, purchase. It might not be exactly like this for your app, but as close as possible. You have post-purchase, promo, and referral. So really the whole user's life cycle. And at every one of these funnel steps, a company might have 3 or 4 different messages going out, and each of those messages might be testing 10 different variants. So between app entry and sign up, you might have potentially 40 different tests going on to try to encourage the user to sign up. And so one company that we work with does this really effectively, and they ask for location services. And they found that there was 10 different reasons why folks would not opt in to location services. And what they had to do to increase that number to opt in, because it was pretty low when they started, was give the best reason for each cohort on why they should enable location services. And so they would A/B test, like, hey, we're going to give you better deals if you open location services. We're going to be secure with your data. We're only going to use it for X purpose. And so they would test all those. And so each one of those tests was optimizing for the sign up step or completing the onboarding flow. And then when they completed the onboarding flow, they had another set of tests that were all optimizing for them to click on the first thing to explore, their first, kind of pre-purchase item. So you can see this, classic example of this is Facebook. If you log on to Facebook, you're seeing one of potentially hundreds of thousands of versions of Facebook because they're testing every single part of the platform, and you're just in one small testing group to see kind of which is the best way to convert you to do a certain task. So that's kind of more sophisticated use case, and this is something we do at Iterable and encourage folks to do all the time. Cool. So moving right along, frequency optimization is really kind of interesting stuff. I think it's kind of an untapped way to really improve your campaigns. But what is frequency optimization? It's really trying to optimize the number of and types of messages an individual receives. Some folks, they might love your brand. They might want to see every single blog post you have and be really interested in that, or your new catalog that comes out every time. But there's a lot of folks who, will not like that. Their churn risks. They might unsubscribe if that one more message hits their inbox. So different users, every user kind of has their own threshold, and it really depends on the brand engagement. So that's frequency optimization. So finding the right number of messages and channel to kind of engage on. And then also a subcategory I think of that is frequency capping. And that's just like, do not send this message. Like we'll cap it right now. So we'll talk about both these in depth. Again, beginner, sorry, you're probably not doing it. Or maybe you're doing something basic where it's like, hey, let's make sure, if they've unsubscribed, we don't send this message. But most likely a lot of folks are just not doing frequency optimization. It's not top of mind. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But a little bit more intermediate, we start to see, maybe a abandoned cart workflow or journey is prioritized over a typical blast. You don't want to distract the user. If they're this close to kind of converting, you really don't want to kind of like send them some stuff that you would typically send them. You want to really prioritize one campaign over the other. So we're starting to see that pretty early on with abandoned carts and then typical blast campaigns. You might kind of cap the number of marketing messages they receive on each channel per week or month or something. So it's like, hey, I don't want to send this user more than 3 pushes a month. And then the 4th push would just automatically gets, capped. And then also, again, deliverability is a huge thing at Iterable. It's, how do you get to the top of the Gmail and not be thrown in promotions, not be thrown in spam? So making sure that if folks are not engaging on a certain channel, you actually just will cut that off preemptively, or maybe have some clever marketing about why you think they might not use that channel. But at the end of the day, you don't want your deliverability hurt because people are marking you as spam because you're just sending too many out. So that's kind of intermediate. It's a good place to be. But kind of what does an advanced frequency optimization look like? So one company that I spoke with, they kind of, A to Z is kind of their slogan, pretty large company. They actually have a global queuing service. So every single message that hits a user is prioritized on an individual user level. And they'll actually go through and, they have their music brand and their shopping brand and their grocery store brand. And they actually will weigh each message against each other and then decide which is the one they're most likely to engage with, which is the user's mode. So they're not kind of all working in parallel. They're really working together on deciding the best way to engage and really prioritizing there. So that's probably the most sophisticated thing that I've seen, the global queuing system, and folks do try to kind of build towards that. And again, this is probably all fed back to a machine learning model or analysis tool for optimization, because it's just you can't really stop the machine. You got to keep on feeding it data and keep on making it better and better. And then seasonality changes. So as COVID hit, user email engagement, mobile engagement changed dramatically across all brands, as I'm sure you guys are aware. So you really have to feed this data back to for further analysis or back to machine learning model. Cool, kind of the last subject we have. I think we're doing pretty good on time, so we might have some time for some questions if you guys are interested. But the last kind of section we're going to cover is segmentation maturity. So what does the beginning kind of segmentation look like when folks start out? You kind of have two buckets. You really have, basically it's broken down as a user, converter, and not, which is fine. That's important. They haven't bought, now they bought. You bring these are from one bucket to another. Nothing wrong with that. It's super effective. Just focusing on those. But that's just for folks kind of generally start out at. Then we start to get a little bit more advanced, and we start to build out what's called marketing personas. So the most common way to kind of start off with this is around frequency, recency, and spend. So frequency is how often they might convert. Recency is, to convert, in the last week, month, or what have you, and then spend. So how much did they actually spend? So this won't work for all brands, but it's a pretty common framework for most. And then you kind of start to segment and build a little matrix around these users. So you might have your super users who do it all, and those people are great. You want everyone to be a super user. So we got to start finding content to get everyone a super user. You might have a first-time user, they're just kind of exploring the platform, just purchased. You might have your whales, and you might have your kind of active users who are joining the app quite often. So really just different personas. And so the question here is, what content can you send to each one of these marketing personas to get them to be a super user? Content that helps your whales buy more often is not likely the same content that will help your active user spend more. So they're different content, and you want to optimize for different things there. So each of these will probably have their own unique messaging to get them to be that super user. And so this is kind of what we see intermediate segmentation look like, and how folks start to break down their kind of user matrix here. So what does advanced segmentation look like? So this is where it gets kind of really crazy and interesting. Is you can just kind of keep building this out. So you can keep building more and more columns around seasonality, promotions, demographics, engagement data, in-person data, all this stuff, and you can kind of keep on building out these marketing personas on and on and on to your heart's content. It might be a little much, but some folks are really effective at it, and they see a ton of lift when they start to do this. In fact, one brand I work with had 65 different marketing personas, each with their own unique strategy on how to get them to be a super user. Of course, they did have multiple streams of revenue, so it was kind of like 5 or 6 streams of revenue, and they had kind of 10 marketing personas per each stream of revenue, and they kind of overlapped a lot. But this was just something that kind of stood out to me as being, very sophisticated, maybe overly complicated, arguably, but really interesting to see how they kind of broke it down to look at with their own marketing strategies. Cool. So let's cover some key takeaways. I know I threw a lot at you and a lot of setup, but let's just cover some key takeaways on things that hopefully will be helpful kind of moving forward, depending on which bucket you place yourself in around each of these kind of different strategies. So the first thing to think about, if you feel like you kind of were in the beginner bucket, nothing wrong with that. Starting off simple and iterating is hugely important, and we definitely encourage folks to do that. You really want to build a strong foundation where you kind of know where you're advancing to. You're looking at the horizon and you see where you want to be, you see the promised land, and you want to start building and building the foundation to get there. One thing we do see with beginning kind of cohorts or beginning kind of marketing, mobile marketing campaigns is that they're often have struggle with clean data. So clean data is everything. You can kind of throw out the multivariant test, throw out the holdout group, throw out a lot of stuff if the data is unreliable. So that would be kind of the first thing we talk about with folks who maybe fall more in the beginning bucket. Switching to, if you're feeling more intermediate and some of these things you're kind of already doing, that's awesome. I would really experiment with what's working well and kind of just build on that. But more importantly, I would say know what isn't working. Because if you have some things that are really sophisticated and some things that are still kind of old school, that's probably where you can actually put most of your focus, and that might be where you get most of your lift from. So that's just something to think about. Really know what isn't working if you're kind of in these intermediate buckets, or know which is not sophisticated part of your marketing campaign. And then you really want to build these use cases so you can easily level up. Kind of the best approach is, you start out with maybe something simple, but when you're ready to really take it to the next level, you can just flip that switch. You may not even need an app update. You might have already done this, already put it in the app, already started to set everything up. And then when you're ready and your team's like, we feel good about this, we can just flip the switch and away we go, and jump into a more sophisticated bucket. So that'd be my recommendation. Really plan out way ahead of time, way before you try to kind of flip that switch. Really have it all mapped out. And if you're feeling like you're in the sophisticated bucket, awesome. Not sure if you need to join this presentation or not, but we're glad to have you. A few things to kind of know. When we talk to some brands doing some really sophisticated things, we see a lot of times like it's just better to take a step back and making sure you're not overcomplicating things. Sometimes we had folks doing some crazy stuff, super complicated, and then one person would leave the team, and now you have a huge gap, and it may take 6 months to a year to onboard them to this new complicated system where someone might need a PhD to run it. So I would encourage, simple is better than complex, and really taking a step back to make sure you're not overcomplicating things with these approaches is I would say, beneficial exercise. And then, again, know which parts are sophisticated and which parts aren't. Back to that kind of very large brand that was doing some really interesting stuff around the global queuing service. They had that amazing technology that was queuing every message up and deciding, which message was the best for the user at what time. But they couldn't actually do like really simple marketing automation or build a really simple journey with the UI. They were struggling with that. So, really no company has perfected every part of their marketing campaigns. There is huge rooms to grow. And I would again kind of look around what is working and what's really not, and what's not is actually probably going to be the best place to get your lift. So last thing, real quick, come talk to Iterable. Come talk to us at Iterable. We'd love to hear from you, what you're doing, where you hope to go. Is there something you liked from this presentation, something you thought could be a little bit different around what sophisticated or intermediate or beginning marketers are doing? I'd love to hear it. Our team would love to hear it. So also please meet my colleagues, Siley and Ed. They're awesome. I'm sure they'd love to talk to you guys at our booth. So that is my presentation for today. And I think we got a few more minutes. I don't know if we have time for questions or not. I think we have 2.5 minutes. Oh, last thing, I guess, actually, is to say thank you. There it goes. So again, my name is Brian Marks, and you can please add me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. Brian F. Marks on LinkedIn or Brian at iterable.com. So I will be at the booth, and hopefully we can talk more about these sophisticated use cases, and love to hear where you guys are at kind of in your marketing maturity. Immaturity is out. All right, thanks so much, y'all. Take care.